The rain had stopped 20 minutes ago, but Seoul still wept. Minjun's driver had taken a wrong turn, or perhaps fate had seized the wheel, because there she was. Adana. His Adana. Through the fogged window of a small bakery on a street he never traveled, she sat alone at a corner table. Thinner. Hollow. The woman who once commanded rooms with her warmth now looked like she was trying to disappear into the walls. 3 days. It had only been 3 days since he'd signed the separation papers. 3 days since he'd chosen Yuna. 3 days since he'd watched his wife leave their penthouse with nothing but a single suitcase and eyes that had finally stopped begging. He told himself he felt nothing. He told himself she deserved this. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a medical envelope, hands trembling, tears sliding down her cheeks, and something inside Minjun's chest cracked. The logo on that envelope. He recognized it. Seoul National University Hospital. Oncology Department. His heart stopped. His blood froze. And in that single devastating moment, Minjun realized he had made a terrible mistake. If this story moves you, please like, share, and subscribe. 3 weeks earlier, the Kong Corporation headquarters towered over Gangnam like a black glass monument to power, its 72 floors housing an empire that stretched from Seoul's financial district to the ports of Lagos. At its apex sat Minjun Kong, a man whose name was spoken in whispers and whose silence had ended careers, relationships, and, according to rumors, he never bothered to deny lives. At 38, Minjun had perfected the art of stillness. Other men filled silence with words, with gestures, with the nervous energy of those who feared being forgotten. Minjun simply existed in his silence, letting it press against everyone in the room until they cracked and revealed themselves. His office occupied the entire 72nd floor, a minimalist expanse of black marble, floor-to-ceiling windows, and furniture that cost more than most people earned in a decade. No photographs. No personal items. Nothing that suggested the man who occupied this space had a heart capable of attachment. But he did. Or he had. The Korean characters tattooed along his left wrist, visible now as he reached for the file on his desk, translated to Blood Remembers. They intertwined with the Dinkra symbols from his Nigerian mother's heritage, the intricate design crawling up toward his forearm beneath his tailored brioni sleeve. The tattoo was his only visible concession to sentiment, a reminder of the dual bloodlines that had shaped him into something the world had never quite seen before. Korean discipline, Nigerian passion, his father's calculated cruelty, his mother's fierce love, both had failed him. Both had taught him that emotion was weakness, that trust was a blade others would eventually use against you. And now, according to the file in his hands, even his wife had proven that lesson true. You're certain? Minjun's voice was low, controlled. He didn't look up at the man standing across from him. Director Co. Jin-woo, head of Kong Corporation's Internal Security Division, nodded once. He was 63 years old, had served Minjun's father before him, and had never once delivered information he couldn't verify. The photographs are authentic. The financial transfers are documented. The witness statements have been corroborated by 3 independent sources. Jin-woo paused, his weathered face betraying nothing. Mrs. Kong has been in contact with Park Industries for approximately 4 months. The communications suggest she's been providing them with information about our Southeast Asian expansion. Minjun turned a page in the file. There was his wife, his Adana, photographed at a restaurant with Park Sung-ho, the son of his greatest rival. Their heads bent together, his hand on her arm, her smile, that smile Minjun had foolishly believed belonged only to him, directed at another man. The next photograph showed her entering a hotel. The one after that showed Park Sung-ho entering the same hotel 40 minutes later. Minjun's expression didn't change. The only indication that anything had shifted inside him was the slow, deliberate way he closed the file, as if he were closing a door on something he never intended to open again. How long have you known? I brought it to you as soon as verification was complete. 3 days. 3 days. Minjun repeated the words without inflection. You watched my wife betray me for 3 days before informing me. I wanted to be certain, sir, given the nature of the accusations. Get out. Jin-woo had worked for the Kong family for 41 years. He knew when to speak and when to vanish. He was through the door in seconds, leaving Minjun alone with the file, the photographs, and the systematic destruction of everything he had allowed himself to believe. The penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of the Kong Tower residential building, a separate structure from the corporate headquarters, connected by a private sky bridge that allowed Minjun to move between worlds without ever touching the ground where ordinary people walked. Adana was in the garden when he arrived home. She had transformed the rooftop terrace into something living, something breathing with color and warmth in a city that often felt sterile. Flowers she'd imported from Nigeria, flame lilies, bird of paradise, African violets, grew alongside Korean bellflowers and chrysanthemums. She knelt among them now, her hands deep in the soil, her natural hair wrapped in a geometric print scarf that matched the warmth of her brown skin. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, and her smile, God, that smile, nearly broke his resolve. "You're home early." She rose, brushing dirt from her knees, her eyes bright with genuine pleasure. "I wasn't expecting you until dinner. Should I ask Mrs. Park to prepare something?" Minjun stood at the edge of the garden, watching her the way he might watch a stranger. Looking for signs. Looking for evidence of the betrayal that apparently lived beneath every word, every touch, every moment of the past 4 months. "We need to talk." Adana's smile flickered. She knew him, knew the weight of his silences, the subtle shifts in his energy that others missed entirely. Something cold moved through her expression, a premonition she quickly suppressed. "Of course. Should we go inside?" "Here is fine." The late afternoon sun caught the edge of his jaw, illuminating the sharp planes of his face. His eyes, dark, piercing, inherited from his Korean father but holding depths that spoke of his Nigerian mother's fire, fixed on her without warmth. "I know about Park Sung-ho." The name landed like a blade. Adana went still. Minjun watched her face cycle through confusion, recognition, and something that looked remarkably like fear. "Guilt," he told himself. "That's guilt you're seeing." "Minjun, I don't understand. What about Park Sung-ho?" "The meetings. The hotel. The information you've been passing to his family's company." Each word was delivered with surgical precision, no emotion bleeding through. "I have photographs. Financial records. Witness statements. So please don't insult us both by pretending ignorance." "What?" Adana stepped toward him, her hands reaching out before she stopped herself. "Minjun, I don't. I've never met with Park Sung-ho privately. Whatever you think you know is wrong. I have photographs of you entering the Shilla Hotel. 40 minutes later, he entered the same hotel. You expect me to believe that's coincidence? I was at the Shilla Hotel 3 weeks ago for the charity auction, the one supporting the Children's Hospital Foundation. I told you about it. You said you couldn't attend because of the Osaka negotiations." Her voice was rising now, confusion giving way to something hotter. "Minjun, you know this. You signed the check for the foundation yourself. And Park Sung-ho? His presence at this charity auction. I didn't see him there. If he was there, I had no idea. I was photographed with dozens of people that night, donors, foundation members, other guests. Are you suggesting I'm having affairs with all of them?" Minjun's jaw tightened. The tattoo on his neck, a small Korean tiger intertwined with Nigerian patterns, usually hidden by his collar, became visible as the muscles beneath it tensed. "I'm suggesting that for the past 4 months, you have been systematically betraying me. Betraying this family. Selling our business strategies to our competitors, and conducting a physical relationship with the son of the man who has spent 2 decades trying to destroy everything my father built." Adana stared at him as if he had become someone she no longer recognized. "You can't believe that. You can't. Minjun, we've been married for 5 years. 5 years. You know me. You know I would never. I thought I knew you." He cut her off, his voice still flat, still controlled, but something beneath it was fracturing. "I thought I knew what you were. Who you were. But I was wrong. No. No." Adana closed the distance between them, grabbing his arm despite the warning in his eyes. "Someone is lying to you. Someone has manufactured this, these photographs, these statements, whatever you think you have. It's not real. I am real. Our marriage is real. Minjun, please look at me. Look at me." He did. He looked at her beautiful, desperate face. He looked at the tears beginning to form in her dark eyes, at the trembling of her lips, at every expression he had once believed he could read like scripture. And he made himself see only the woman in the photographs. The betrayer. The liar. The latest in a long line of people who had proven that love was just another word for vulnerability. "The lawyers will contact you tomorrow. You'll receive a generous settlement. I won't have it said that I abandoned my responsibilities. But I want you out of this penthouse by morning. Minjun. Mrs. Park will help you pack. Take what you need. Leave what belongs to me." "I am not leaving." Adana's voice cracked, but she held her ground. "I am not leaving because I have done nothing wrong. If you want to throw away 5 years, throw away everything we've built. You'll have to look me in the eye and tell me you genuinely believe I would betray you. Not because some file told you so. Because you believe it. The sun had shifted. The garden was half in shadow now, and Min-jun stood at the dividing line, his face cast in darkness while Adana remained in the dying light. He should have hesitated. Should have listened to the voice somewhere deep inside him that was screaming that something was wrong, that this was too clean, too convenient, too perfectly constructed. But Min-jun Kong had been taught from birth that hesitation was weakness. That doubt was death. That once a decision was made, you never looked back. I believe it, he said, and watched the light leave his wife's eyes. Yuna had been waiting for this moment for 3 years. She sat in the private lounge at the Ritz-Carlton, sipping champagne she could finally taste, watching the city lights sparkle like promises being made just for her. Her reflection in the window showed a woman who had fought for every inch of her position. Sleek black hair, porcelain skin, couture dress that cost more than most people's cars. She was 32, impossibly sophisticated, and had spent the past 5 years as the executive director of Kong Corporation's Public Relations Division. She was also the woman who had orchestrated Adana Okoye's destruction. Her phone buzzed. A message from Director Seo. It's done. She leaves tomorrow. Yuna allowed herself a small smile. Not too wide. Even alone, she maintained control. But inside, triumph was burning through her veins like champagne bubbles. She had waited so long for this. Min-jun Kong had been hers first. They'd had an arrangement years ago. Nothing official, nothing acknowledged, but she had been in his bed and she had foolishly believed she would eventually be in his life. Then that Nigerian woman had appeared at a corporate event in Lagos, and Min-jun's gaze had shifted, and Yuna had watched her future evaporate. Adana Okoye. The name still tasted bitter on her tongue. She was everything Yuna wasn't. Warm where Yuna was polished, genuine where Yuna was calculated, naturally magnetic where Yuna had to carefully construct every moment of appeal. People loved Adana instinctively, helplessly, the way they loved sunshine and music and things that made them feel alive. And Min-jun, cold, untouchable, impossible Min-jun, had loved her too. Yuna had watched them together for 5 years. Watched the way his eyes softened when Adana entered a room. Watched his hand find the small of her back, an unconscious gesture of possession and protection that he had never offered anyone else. Watched him become, for the first time in his life, vulnerable. And vulnerability, as Yuna knew, was always a weapon waiting to be wielded. It had taken 2 years to construct the trap. False photographs, created by a digital artist who specialized in making the impossible look authentic. Manufactured financial transfers. Routed through shell companies that would trace back to Adana's business accounts with enough creative accounting. Witness statements from people who owed Yuna favors, people who would say whatever she needed them to say. The hardest part had been Director Seo. The old man was loyal to the bone, but he was also paranoid and suspicious and devoted to protecting Min-jun above all else. Yuna had spent months feeding him small concerns, subtle suggestions, questions about Adana's background that were designed to plant seeds of doubt. She had arranged for him to accidentally discover the first photograph. Let him investigate on his own, knowing he would find exactly what she had planted for him to find. Director Seo genuinely believed Adana was a traitor. That made his report to Min-jun authentic in all the ways that mattered. Now all Yuna had to do was step into the void Adana was leaving behind. Not immediately. She wasn't stupid. Min-jun would need time to process his wife's betrayal, time to rebuild the walls around his heart. But Yuna would be there, supportive, professional, understanding. She would remind him of their history. She would make herself indispensable. And eventually, she would take her rightful place. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Min-jun's personal assistant. Mr. Kong requests your presence at the office. He has a public relations matter to discuss. Yuna finished her champagne and checked her reflection one final time. Let the games begin. Adana didn't sleep that night. She packed mechanically, moving through the penthouse like a ghost through a house that had once been home. 5 years of her life reduced to suitcases and boxes. 5 years of love and partnership and the slow, patient work of earning Min-jun's trust. All of it declared worthless by photographs she had never posed for and accusations she couldn't disprove. She stopped in front of their bedroom mirror, staring at her reflection as if it belonged to a stranger. The woman looking back at her was 30 years old, but looked older tonight. The soft curves of her face, which Min-jun had once traced with his fingers as if memorizing scripture, seemed hollow now. Her dark eyes, eyes her mother had always said held too much feeling, were red-rimmed and exhausted. She had come to Seoul 6 years ago as an artist, carrying her father's ambition and her mother's dreams. She had built an interior design business from nothing, working with Nigeria's wealthy elite before expanding to Asia's luxury market. Her work had brought her to a Kong Corporation event in Lagos, and Minjun had looked at her across a crowded room, and her life had changed forever. He had been different then. Still cold, still controlled, but she had seen beneath the surface to the man who had been taught that love was weakness. She had spent years proving him wrong. Years showing him that trust didn't have to be a trap, that vulnerability could be strength, that letting someone in didn't mean giving them weapons to destroy you. And now, in a single afternoon, all of that had been erased. Someone is lying to him, she thought. Someone manufactured this. But who? And why? The answer seemed obvious. Park Industries, Minjun's greatest competitor. Frame her as a traitor, destroy Minjun's marriage, destabilize him emotionally. Corporate warfare dressed up as personal betrayal. But something about it felt wrong. Too clean. Too convenient. Too perfectly designed to exploit Minjun's deepest fears. This wasn't random. This was personal. Adana's hands trembled as she folded the last of her clothes. She had tried one more time to talk to him, to break through the wall of ice he had erected around himself. She had begged him to investigate further, to verify the evidence, to give her the chance to prove her innocence. He had looked at her with eyes that held nothing but cold certainty. "You should have been smarter," he had said. "You should have known I would find out." And then he had walked away, left her standing in their garden, surrounded by the flowers she had planted and nurtured and loved, watching her marriage crumble into ashes. The sun was rising when Adana carried her last suitcase to the elevator. Mrs. Park, the housekeeper who had been with the Kong family for decades, waited by the door with tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Kong. I don't understand what's happening, but I know, you would never do what they're saying." Adana embraced the older woman, holding on perhaps a moment too long. "Take care of him," she whispered. "He won't admit it, but he needs taking care of. Where will you go?" It was a good question. Adana had money. Her own business had been successful, and Minjun had insisted she maintain separate accounts even after they married. But she had no family in Seoul, few friends outside the circles that revolved around the Kong Empire. Her parents were gone, her father 3 years ago, her mother last year. Her sister, Chisholm, was in Lagos with children of her own and a husband and a life that didn't include room for a disgraced sister fleeing a ruined marriage. "I have an apartment," Adana said finally. "Something I kept from before. I'll figure the rest out." She didn't look back as the elevator doors closed. If she had, she might have seen Mrs. Park's face. The confusion and suspicion and the dawning recognition that something about this entire situation was terribly, terribly wrong. The apartment was small but clean, located in a quiet neighborhood far from the glass towers of Gangnam. Adana had kept it all these years for reasons she couldn't quite articulate. Perhaps some part of her had always known that castles built on love could crumble without warning. She spent the first day in bed, curtains drawn, allowing herself the luxury of grief. She cried until her body was empty, until the tears stopped coming, and all that remained was a hollow ache in her chest where her heart used to be. 5 years. 5 years of loving a man who had looked at forged photographs and manufactured evidence, and chosen to believe them over the woman who had shared his bed, his life, his future. He didn't even hesitate. That was what destroyed her. Not the accusation itself. Anyone could be fooled by cleverly constructed lies. But the speed with which Minjun had accepted the narrative. The absolute certainty in his eyes. The complete absence of doubt. He had been waiting for her to betray him. Some part of him had always been waiting, always holding back, always preparing for the moment when love would prove itself to be the trap he had been raised to believe it was. And when the evidence appeared, he had accepted it like a man receiving confirmation of something he had known all along. He never really trusted me, Adana realized. 5 years, and he never really let me in. The thought should have made her angry. And maybe eventually anger would come. But for now there was only grief. Grief for the marriage, grief for the future they would never have, grief for the man she loved who had never quite learned how to love her back. On the second day, she forced herself to shower, to eat, to begin the process of rebuilding a life from the fragments. Her business contacts in Seoul were already distancing themselves. Word traveled fast in these circles, and no one wanted to be associated with the woman who had allegedly betrayed Minjun Kong. Her Korean clients canceled meetings. Her Nigerian connections sent carefully worded messages expressing support while making it clear they couldn't be seen working with her publicly. Adana watched her professional life collapse alongside her personal one, and some distant part of her marveled at the efficiency of the destruction. Whoever had done this had been thorough. On the third morning, she woke to a notification from her doctor's office. "Your test results are ready. Please contact us to schedule an appointment." The tests. She had almost forgotten about them. 3 weeks ago, she had gone in for a routine checkup, something she'd been putting off for too long, distracted by the demands of her life with Min-jun. The doctor had noticed some irregularities. Blood work had been ordered. Follow-up tests scheduled. With everything that had happened, the medical appointments had slipped her mind entirely. Adana stared at the notification, a cold feeling settling in her stomach that had nothing to do with Min-jun. It's probably nothing, she told herself. Routine follow-up. Standard procedure. But her hands were shaking as she called the clinic to schedule her appointment. Dr. Kim's office was on the 4th floor of Seoul National University Hospital, in the wing dedicated to oncology and specialized care. Adana sat across from the desk, hands folded in her lap, face composed despite the terror hammering against her ribs. "Mrs. Kong." "Ms. Okoye," Adana corrected quietly. "Please." "Ms. Okoye." Dr. Kim, a kind-faced woman in her 50s who had clearly delivered difficult news before, nodded sympathetically. "Ms. Okoye, I'm afraid your test results show some concerning findings." The world narrowed to a pinpoint. Sound became muffled. Light seemed to dim at the edges of Adana's vision. "Concerning findings," she repeated. The blood work revealed markers that warranted further investigation. The follow-up imaging confirmed our suspicions. Dr. Kim paused, her voice gentle but clinical. "You have a tumor in your left kidney. The good news is that we've caught it relatively early. The size suggests it hasn't metastasized. With immediate treatment, your prognosis is favorable." "Tumor. Kidney. Cancer." The words floated past Adana like debris in a flood. "Treatment," she heard herself say. "What kind of treatment?" "Surgery to remove the affected kidney, followed by monitoring and possible chemotherapy, depending on what we find. I want to schedule you with our surgical team as soon as possible. Time is a factor here." Adana nodded mechanically, watching Dr. Kim's lips move, hearing explanations about procedures and timelines and survival rates. But her mind was elsewhere. Back in the penthouse, back in the garden, back in the moment when her husband had looked at her with cold eyes and declared her a traitor. She had cancer. And she had no one. Her parents were dead. Her marriage was destroyed. Her sister was an ocean away. The man she had trusted to stand beside her, through anything, had thrown her away like garbage. She was going to fight this battle alone. "Ms. Okoye?" Dr. Kim's voice cut through the fog. "Are you all right? Is there someone I can call?" Adana looked at her with eyes that had dried past the point of tears. "No," she said quietly. "There's no one." The bakery was a small place, tucked into a side street in a neighborhood where tourists rarely wandered. Adana had discovered it during her early days in Seoul, before Min-jun, before the penthouse, before the life that had seemed so permanent and had proven so fragile. She came here now out of instinct, seeking the comfort of a place that held no memories of her husband, no reminders of the future she had lost. The medical envelope sat on the table in front of her, still sealed. She couldn't bring herself to open it again, to see the words printed in stark black and white, the diagnosis that would reshape whatever remained of her life. Dr. Kim had given her pamphlets about treatment options, support groups, resources for patients navigating cancer alone. All of it was stuffed inside the envelope, a comprehensive guide to surviving something that felt, in this moment, insurvivable. Adana stared out the window at the gray Seoul morning, watching people pass by. People with jobs and families and futures, people who didn't know that everything could be taken away in an instant. She didn't notice the black car that had stopped across the street. She didn't see the man inside, frozen behind tinted glass, staring at her with an expression of dawning horror. She was thinking about what it meant to die alone. Min-jun couldn't move. His driver was asking something, whether to continue to the office, whether something was wrong, but Min-jun heard nothing except the roaring in his own ears. Seoul National University Hospital. Oncology Department. He knew that logo. He had seen it too many times in his life. On the paperwork during his mother's illness, on the bills that had accumulated during the months she spent fighting the disease that eventually claimed her. Cancer had taken her slowly, piece by piece, while his father stood by and did nothing except maintain the appearance of a grieving husband. Now his wife, his ex-wife, he reminded himself, though the correction felt like a knife, sat in a rundown bakery, holding an envelope from that same department. 3 days. It had been 3 days since he'd destroyed their marriage. 3 days since he'd looked at manufactured evidence and chosen to believe the worst. 3 days since he'd watched her walk away with nothing but a suitcase and the shattered remnants of her dignity. And now she sat alone, thinner than he'd ever seen her, clutching a medical envelope that suggested everything he believed about her situation was about to change. Maybe it's nothing, he told himself. Routine tests. Follow-up appointments. It doesn't have to mean. But even as he formed the thought, he watched Adana's face crumple. Watched her press her hand to her mouth as tears began to slide down her cheeks. Watched her body fold in on itself like a woman carrying weight too heavy to bear. This was not the posture of routine tests. This was grief. This was fear. This was someone receiving news that would alter the course of their life. And she was completely alone. Sir. His driver's voice finally penetrated the fog. Sir, should I drive? Minjun said, his voice harsh. Now. To the office. The car pulled away, and Minjun forced himself not to look back. This changes nothing, he told himself. She betrayed you. Medical issues don't erase betrayal. Stay focused. Stay controlled. But his hands were shaking. For the first time in years, his legendary composure was cracking. Yuna was waiting in his office when he arrived, elegant as always in a cream silk blouse and high-waisted black trousers. She rose from the leather sofa with fluid grace, offering a sympathetic smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I heard about Adana, she said, using the first name deliberately, a subtle establishment of intimacy. I'm so sorry, Minjun. I can't imagine how difficult this must be. I don't want to discuss my personal life. Of course. I only meant. I said I don't want to discuss it. His voice was ice. You're here for the Singapore press release. Do you have it? Yuna's smile flickered almost imperceptibly, a crack in her composure that she covered instantly. She had expected more warmth, more vulnerability, more of the opening she had worked so hard to create. Yes. The communications team has prepared the draft. I wanted your approval before we proceed. She handed him the tablet containing the document, watching his face as he read. His features were sharper than usual, tension visible in the line of his jaw and the tightness around his eyes. Something had disturbed him this morning, something beyond the expected aftermath of ending his marriage. This is fine, Minjun said after a moment. Proceed. There's also the matter of the Park Industries rumors. They're suggesting that your former wife's, alleged involvement has compromised your Southeast Asian expansion. I think we should get ahead of this with a strategic media placement. No. Minjun. I said no. He looked up at her, and Yuna felt a chill run down her spine at the emptiness in his gaze. I will not discuss Adana publicly. Not to confirm, not to deny, not to spin. The silence speaks for itself. Of course. Yuna backed down smoothly, recognizing that she had pushed too far too quickly. I apologize. I only want to protect the company's interests. Then do your job and leave my personal business out of it. She retreated with practiced grace, but inside, satisfaction was blooming. Minjun was rattled. Off balance. His legendary control was slipping. And when a man like him began to slip, he needed something to grab onto. Someone to grab onto. Yuna intended to be that someone. The rest of Minjun's day passed in a blur of meetings and decisions, and the mechanical performance of leadership. He had built his empire by compartmentalizing, boxing away emotion, focusing only on what needed to be done. But today the boxes wouldn't stay shut. Every time his concentration drifted, he saw her. Adana in the bakery window, tears streaming down her face. The medical envelope in her trembling hands. The logo that had haunted his nightmares for decades. It doesn't matter, he told himself over and over. She betrayed you. Whatever she's going through now is not your concern. But the words rang hollow. At 6 p.m., he canceled his remaining meetings and retreated to his private office. He poured himself a whiskey, a rare indulgence, and stood at the window, staring out at the city he controlled. His phone sat on the desk behind him, dark and silent. He didn't call her. He didn't send someone to investigate. He stood frozen between the man he had trained himself to be and the husband he was terrified to remember being. Across the city, Director Seo Jinwoo was having doubts. He sat in his home office, surrounded by the case files on Adana Okoye, reviewing the evidence for the 20th time. The photographs. The financial transfers. The witness statements. Everything checked out. Everything was verified. Everything was too perfect. Jin-woo had spent 40 years investigating corporate espionage, infidelity, betrayal in all its forms. He had learned that real betrayal was messy. Real affairs left loose threads. Phone records that didn't quite align, alibis with unexplained gaps, witnesses who contradicted each other on small details. But this case against Adana was seamless. Every photograph perfectly framed. Every financial trail immaculately documented. Every witness statement aligned as if they had been scripted. And there was something else, something that had been bothering him since he delivered his report to Min-jun. The witness who claimed to have seen Adana meeting with Park Sung-ho privately had provided a physical description of her outfit that matched the charity auction photographs exactly. The same dress, the same jewelry, the same hairstyle. But the witness claimed to have seen her at a different location, on a different date, 3 days after the auction. Why would Adana wear the exact same distinctive outfit, a one-of-a-kind designer dress she had been photographed in at a major event, to a secret meeting days later? She wouldn't. No woman with Adana's intelligence and resources would make such a basic mistake. Unless the photograph had been repurposed. Unless someone had taken images from the public event and used them to create a false narrative about private meetings. Jin-woo reached for his phone, then stopped. If he was wrong, if he raised suspicions that proved unfounded, he would destroy his relationship with Min-jun. Worse, he would have failed in his duty to protect the Kong Empire from a genuine threat. But if he was right, if Adana was innocent, then he had helped Min-jun destroy his own happiness based on manufactured lies. And that was something Jin-woo's conscience could not bear. He pulled out a secure phone, one that wasn't connected to the Kong Corporation network, and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "It's Jin-woo," he said when the call connected. "I need you to investigate something for me. Quietly. Off the books." On the other end of the line, a woman's voice responded. "What kind of investigation?" "The kind that could bring down someone powerful. Maybe multiple someones." He paused, steeling himself. "I think I've made a terrible mistake. And I need to know the truth." Over the next week, Min-jun became a ghost in his own life. He attended meetings but didn't hear the discussions. He signed documents without reading them. He gave orders that his executives rushed to obey, never realizing that their leader was operating on autopilot. Every evening, his driver took a detour. It was never acknowledged, never discussed, but somehow the car always found its way past the small bakery where Adana had sat crying over a medical envelope. And every evening, Min-jun searched for her through the tinted windows. Some nights she was there, sitting alone at the same corner table, pushing food around a plate she rarely ate from. She had lost more weight. He could see it in the hollowing of her cheeks, the way her clothes hung loose on her frame. Other nights she wasn't there at all. Those nights were worse. On the 7th day, Min-jun finally broke. "Find out where she's living," he told his assistant. "Discreetly. I don't want anyone to know I'm asking." "Sir, I thought." "Just do it." The address came within hours. A modest apartment building in a neighborhood Min-jun had never visited. Nothing like the penthouse they had shared. Nothing like the life he had provided for her. That evening, instead of going to the bakery, he had his driver park across the street from her apartment. He watched her return home around 8 p.m., walking slowly with a bag of groceries clutched to her chest. Even from a distance, he could see the exhaustion in her posture, the weight of whatever she was carrying, medically and emotionally. A man met her at the entrance. Min-jun's entire body went rigid. The man was tall, well-dressed, with the kind of easy confidence that suggested wealth and breeding. He reached for Adana's grocery bag, taking it from her arms despite her protests. He placed a hand on her lower back exactly where Min-jun's hand had always rested, and guided her into the building. They were talking, laughing even. She was laughing with another man. Something dark and violent erupted in Min-jun's chest. Jealousy so intense it bordered on rage. Possessiveness that defied every logical argument he'd made to himself about moving on. "She betrayed you," his mind insisted. "She has no right to your jealousy." But his heart, the heart he had spent years teaching himself to ignore, was screaming something different. "She was yours. She is yours. And another man is touching her. Find out who that is," he growled at his assistant through the car's intercom. "Name, background, relationship to her. Everything." "Yes, sir." Min-jun sat in the darkness, watching the light in what he assumed was Adana's apartment window. The silhouettes of two figures moved behind thin curtains. He stayed for 2 hours. He never saw the man leave. The man's name was Daniel Okonkwo. The file landed on Minjun's desk the following morning, and he devoured every word with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Age 35. Nigerian. Based in Seoul for the past decade. Founder of a successful architecture firm that had done extensive work in Southeast Asia. Never married. No children. Known for his charm, his philanthropy, and his impeccable reputation among Seoul's Nigerian expat community. And, according to the investigator's notes, he had been a close friend of Adana's before she met Minjun. Friend. Minjun read the word with a cynicism that had been carved into him by decades of experience. Men and women were never just friends. There was always something more: desire, history, possibility. Had Adana been involved with this man before their marriage? Had she returned to him now that Minjun had thrown her away? The thought made him physically sick. But beneath the jealousy, something else was surfacing. Something that felt terrifyingly like doubt. If Adana had truly been a traitor, if she had been selling his secrets to Park Industries, why would she retreat to this modest apartment? Why would she be losing weight, crying alone in bakeries, accepting help from an old friend? She should be celebrating, enjoying the rewards of her betrayal, not wasting away in a tiny apartment while cancer ate at her body. If that's even what it is, he reminded himself. You don't know what the envelope said. You're assuming. But he couldn't get the image out of his mind. That logo, that department, that look on her face as she broke down in public. His mother had looked like that toward the end, hollowed out, devastated, fighting something she couldn't defeat alone. Minjun's hand moved toward his phone, then stopped. What would you even say? He demanded of himself. I'm sorry I destroyed our marriage based on photographs I never questioned. I'm sorry I chose to believe the worst of you. I'm sorry I'm only reaching out now because I think you might be dying. The cowardice of it disgusted him. But the alternative, reaching out, admitting doubt, opening himself to the possibility that he had made a catastrophic mistake, terrified him more. So he did nothing. He sat in his office, surrounded by the trappings of power, and did nothing at all. 2 weeks after Minjun sent Adana away, Director Seo requested a private meeting. There was something different about the old man as he entered Minjun's office. A tension in his shoulders. A guardedness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. You have news? Minjun asked without preamble. I have concerns. Minjun went still. Concerns? About the investigation into your wife. Former wife. Jinwoo set a tablet on the desk between them. I've been reviewing the evidence we used to build our case. At the time, everything seemed airtight. But upon closer examination, certain inconsistencies have emerged. What kind of inconsistencies? The photographs from the hotel, for instance. The timestamp data embedded in the image files suggests they were taken at the charity auction, the public event Mrs. Kong mentioned. But the photos were presented to us as evidence of a private meeting days later. Minjun's hand, resting on the desk, curled slowly into a fist. The tattoo on his wrist, Blood Remembers, seemed to pulse against his skin. Go on. Additionally, one of our key witnesses, the man who claimed to have seen Mrs. Kong meeting privately with Park Sung-ho, has a financial connection to someone within Kong Corporation. Someone with access to internal information and resources. Who? Jinwoo hesitated. I need to complete my investigation before I can. Who? The word cracked through the office like a whip. Minjun was on his feet now, the controlled mask slipping to reveal something raw and dangerous beneath. Jinwoo met his gaze steadily. Director Yuna Park. The silence that followed was absolute. Minjun felt the ground shifting beneath him. Felt every certainty he had clung to over the past 2 weeks beginning to crumble. Yuna, he repeated. You're suggesting that Yuna fabricated evidence against my wife. I'm suggesting it's a possibility that requires investigation. The witness has received 3 substantial payments from an account traced to Director Park's personal finances. The timing coincides with the emergence of the evidence against Mrs. Kong. Why would Yuna? Minjun stopped himself, the answer crystallizing even as he formed the question. Because she wanted you. Because she's wanted you for years. Because Adana was in her way. He thought about all the times Yuna had positioned herself nearby during his marriage. The sympathetic comments about how difficult Adana must find it, adjusting to Korean society. The subtle suggestions that perhaps his wife didn't fully understand his world. The way she had materialized so quickly after the separation, ready to comfort, ready to support, ready to fill the void Adana had left. She planned this. She destroyed my marriage deliberately. And I helped her do it. Continue the investigation. Minjun said, his voice deadly calm. I want evidence, concrete, irrefutable evidence, of what happened and who was responsible. And Jinwoo, sir, if this is true, if my wife was innocent, I want to know everything you find, no matter how much it damns me. Jinwoo bowed slightly and retreated, leaving Minjun alone with the rubble of his certainties. That night, Minjun drove himself. No driver, no security, no one to witness what he was about to do. He parked outside Adana's apartment building and sat in the darkness, staring up at her window. The light was on. She was home, probably alone, unless that Daniel character had returned. The jealousy that thought-provoked was nothing compared to the crushing weight of what he was beginning to understand. I threw her away. I looked at manufactured evidence, and chose to believe it, because believing it was easier than trusting her. I destroyed the only person who ever really loved me because some part of me was always waiting for the betrayal. His mother's voice echoed in his memory, one of the last things she had said before the cancer took her. Your father taught you to survive, Minjun, but he never taught you to live. Don't let his fear become your prison. He had failed her. He had failed himself. And worst of all, he had failed Adana. Minjun sat in the car until his coffee went cold, until the light in her window finally went dark, until the city around him settled into the quiet hum of 3 a.m. Then he drove home to his empty penthouse and sat among the flowers she had planted, now wilting, untended, and waited for the morning to bring more destruction. Director Seo's full report arrived 1 week later. It was devastating. Every piece of evidence against Adana had been manufactured. The photographs were digitally altered composites created from public images. The financial transfers were fabricated through shell companies controlled by Yuna's associates. The witness statements came from people on Yuna's payroll, people who had been paid handsomely to lie. And there was more. Yuna's long-term plan had been meticulous, documented in encrypted communications that Jinwoo's investigator had painstakingly recovered. She had spent 2 years constructing this trap. 2 years feeding Director Seo carefully designed seeds of suspicion. 2 years manipulating Minjun's deepest fears until he was primed to believe the worst of the woman he loved. Also, she could step into Adana's place. Minjun read the report 3 times. Then he destroyed his office. They found him an hour later, surrounded by shattered glass and splintered furniture, blood dripping from his knuckles where they had connected with the wall. His shirt was torn. His hair, usually immaculate, hung loose over his forehead. The tattoo on his neck, the tiger and the African symbols, the reminder of his dual heritage, seemed to writhe against his skin. Jinwoo stood in the doorway, saying nothing. I did this to her. Minjun's voice was raw, broken. I looked at her, at Adana, at my wife, and I chose to believe lies. I threw her away like she was nothing. Like 5 years meant nothing. Like she meant nothing. Sir. And now she's sick. She's sick, Jinwoo. She has cancer and she's alone, and I did that to her. I abandoned her when she needed me most because I was too much of a coward to trust my own heart. You didn't know. I should have known. Minjun looked up and Jinwoo saw something he had never witnessed in all his years of service. Minjun Kong, heir to an empire, feared by thousands, broken completely. I should have trusted her. I should have investigated properly. I should have looked at that evidence and seen what you eventually saw, that it was too perfect, too convenient, too designed to exploit exactly what I feared most. He sank down amid the wreckage, pressing his bloodied hands to his face. She begged me to believe her. She stood in our garden and she looked me in the eye and she begged me to trust her. And I walked away. I walked away. Jinwoo approached slowly, crouching beside his employer with the care of a man approaching a wounded predator. There is still time, he said quietly. Mrs. Kong, Ms. Okoye, she is still in Seoul. She is still fighting her illness. You can still make this right. How? Minjun demanded. How do you make right something this broken? She thinks I chose another woman over her. She thinks I looked at our marriage and decided she wasn't worth fighting for. She's facing cancer alone because I couldn't, because I wouldn't. His voice broke. In that moment, stripped of armor and certainties, Minjun Kong was simply a man who had destroyed the thing he loved most. You begin, Jinwoo said, by showing up, by telling her the truth, by accepting that she may never forgive you, and fighting anyway. Minjun raised his head, tears cutting tracks through the dust and debris on his face. And Yuna? Jinwoo's expression hardened. Director Park will be dealt with. But that is not your priority. Your priority is the woman who is facing a battle for her life without the husband who should be standing beside her. Minjun stared at his bloodied hands, The hands that had signed the separation papers, the hands that had pushed Adana away, the hands that should have held her through this nightmare. "Tomorrow," he said quietly. "I'll go to her tomorrow." But fate, as always, had other plans. The call came at 2 a.m. Minjun had finally fallen into an uneasy sleep, his injured hands bandaged, his destroyed office cordoned off for repair. When his phone rang, he answered without thinking. "Mr. Kong." An unfamiliar voice. "Professional. Medical. This is Seoul National University Hospital. I'm calling about Adana Okoye. You're listed as her emergency contact." His blood turned to ice. "What happened?" "Ms. Okoye collapsed at her residence this evening. She was brought to the emergency department approximately 2 hours ago. Her condition is serious. We recommend that her family members come to the hospital as soon as possible." The phone was still in his hand when Minjun reached his car, still in his hand when he ran 3 red lights, still in his hand when he burst through the emergency department doors like a man possessed. "Adana Okoye," he demanded at the nurse's station. "Where is she?" The nurse looked up at the wild-eyed man in wrinkled clothes and bandaged hands, and something in his expression made her decide not to argue about visiting hours. "Room 317. Down the hall, 3rd door on the right." "But sir," he was already gone. She looked so small. That was his first thought as he stopped in the doorway of her room. Adana, his Adana, who had always seemed so strong, so vibrant, so impossibly alive. She lay in the hospital bed surrounded by machines, for lines running into her arms, monitors tracking her heartbeat and her oxygen levels, and every other metric that measured how close she was to slipping away. Minjun couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stand there and absorb the devastation his choices had wrought. "Sir." A doctor appeared beside him, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a grave expression. "Are you family?" "I'm her," the word caught in his throat. "Husband? Ex-husband? The man who destroyed her and then came running when it was almost too late?" "I'm all she has." The doctor studied him for a moment, seeing something in his shattered expression that transcended paperwork and legal designations. "Ms. Okoye has been under significant stress, which has complicated her treatment. She was scheduled for surgery next week, but her body is showing signs of systemic strain. We've stabilized her for now, but she's going to need support, emotional support, to get through what comes next. I'll be here." The words came without thought, without calculation. "I'm not leaving her again. Whatever she needs, whatever it costs, whatever, I'll be here." The doctor nodded slowly. "She's been asking for someone named Minjun. In her sleep. Is that you?" He closed his eyes, pain lancing through him. "Even now, even after everything, she's still calling for me." "Yes," he whispered. "That's me." He sat beside her bed through the night. He held her hand, gently, so gently, terrified of disturbing the tubes and wires that were keeping her alive. He watched her face, tracing the features he had memorized years ago, seeing now how much she had suffered in the weeks since he'd sent her away. "I did this. I broke her. And even broken, she's still fighting." Sometime around dawn, her eyes fluttered open. For a moment, she didn't seem to know where she was. Her gaze drifted across the hospital room, confused and unfocused. Then it landed on him, on Minjun, sitting beside her bed with bandaged hands and red-rimmed eyes, and awareness flooded back. "Minjun." Her voice was barely a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "The hospital called. You collapsed. I came as fast as I could." She tried to pull her hand away from his, but she was too weak. "You shouldn't be here. You chose someone else. You don't get to be here." "I know." He didn't try to hold her hand tighter, didn't try to force contact she didn't want. "I know I don't deserve to be here. I know I destroyed everything. But I couldn't stay away. When I heard you were sick, when I realized what you've been facing alone, I couldn't." He broke off, his composure shattering. "I was wrong, Adana. About everything. The evidence against you was fabricated. Every photograph, every document, every witness statement. It was all manufactured by someone who wanted you out of my life so she could take your place." Adana stared at him, her dark eyes, dulled by illness but still holding echoes of her former fire, searching his face. "What?" "Una Park. She spent 2 years constructing a trap. She manipulated me into believing you had betrayed me because she wanted." He couldn't finish the sentence. "It doesn't matter what she wanted. What matters is that you're innocent. You were always innocent. And I was too broken, too afraid, too stupid to see it." The silence stretched between them, heavy with years of love and weeks of devastation. Finally, Adana spoke. "You believed her. Her voice was flat, lifeless. You looked at photographs and documents and chose to believe a lie instead of believing me. I begged you, Minjun. I begged you to trust me. And you walked away. I know. I had to find out I had cancer alone. I had to hear the diagnosis alone. I had to plan for surgery and treatment, and possibly dying alone because you threw me away like I was nothing. I know. Tears were sliding down his face now. Minjun Kong, the man who never showed weakness, weeping openly beside his wife's hospital bed. I know what I did. I know I can never fix it. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But Adana, please let me be here now. Let me fight beside you. Let me try to earn back even a fraction of what I destroyed. She turned her face away from him. I don't know if I can. The heart monitor beeped steadily in the silence. Minjun sat frozen, watching his wife's profile. The tears sliding from the corner of her eye into her hair, the way her lips pressed together as if holding back words she wasn't strong enough to speak. He had spent his entire life building walls. Building empires. Building a version of himself that couldn't be hurt because it couldn't be reached. And in 20 minutes, all of it had crumbled. I love you, he said quietly, knowing she might not hear him, might not care, might never forgive him. I love you more than I have ever loved anything. And I will spend whatever time we have left proving it, whether that's 50 years or 50 days. I'm not leaving this room. I'm not leaving you. Even if you never forgive me, even if you never let me touch you again, I will be here. Fighting beside you. Because that's what I should have done from the beginning. Adana's hand, lying limp on the hospital blanket, trembled slightly. But she didn't reach for him. And the monitor kept beeping. And somewhere in the city, Una Park was making plans to destroy whatever remained of their shattered lives. 3 days passed in the sterile quiet of room 317. Minjun didn't leave. He slept in the uncomfortable chair beside Adana's bed, waking at every shift in her breathing, every beep of the monitors, every soft sound that might signal distress. The nurses stopped asking him to leave during non-visiting hours after the first night. Something in his eyes told them this was not a man who would be moved by hospital policy. His assistant brought him fresh clothes. His lawyers brought him documents that needed signatures. His executives brought him reports that required decisions. Minjun handled all of it from the corner of Adana's hospital room, his voice low and controlled, his attention never fully leaving the woman in the bed. She barely spoke to him. When she was awake, she would stare at the ceiling or out the window, her face a mask of exhaustion and something deeper. Something that looked like grief for a life she had already accepted losing. When nurses came to check her vitals or doctors arrived to discuss her treatment, she answered their questions in monosyllables. But she didn't ask him to leave. Minjun clung to that like a drowning man clings to driftwood. On the second day, Daniel Okonkwo arrived. Minjun heard him before he saw him, a warm, resonant voice speaking to nurses in the hallway, asking about Adana's condition with the easy familiarity of someone who had been checking in regularly. He's been here before, Minjun realized. While I was sitting in my car watching from a distance, this man was actually showing up. Daniel appeared in the doorway, a bouquet of sunflowers in his hands, Adana's favorites, Minjun remembered with a pang, and stopped short when he saw the man sitting beside her bed. Mr. Kong. Daniel's voice cooled noticeably. I didn't expect to see you here. Minjun rose slowly, acutely aware of how he must look. Unshaven, exhausted, wearing the same clothes he'd pulled on 3 days ago when the hospital called. The tattoo on his neck was visible above his rumpled collar, the tiger and African symbols standing out against his skin. Mr. Okonkwo. He inclined his head slightly. I understand you've been a good friend to Adana during a difficult time. Someone had to be. The words landed like a slap. Daniel. Adana's voice, weak but firm, cut through the tension. Don't. Daniel moved past Minjun to her bedside, setting the sunflowers on her table and taking her hand with an ease that made Minjun's chest constrict. I came as soon as I heard you were admitted, Daniel said, his voice softening. The nurses said you collapsed at home. Ada, you promised me you'd call if anything. I know. I'm sorry. It happened so fast. Minjun watched them together, watched the comfortable intimacy, the shared history, the connection that existed outside and before his claim on her. Daniel's hand on hers. Daniel's concerned face hovering close. Daniel using a nickname Minjun had never heard. Ada. The jealousy that surged through him was irrational and consuming. He knew he had no right to it. He had thrown her away. He had chosen another woman, or believed he had, and left her to face this nightmare alone. If she had found comfort with Daniel, found friendship, found anything that made this horror more bearable. He had no grounds to object. But his blood burned anyway. "I should give you some privacy," Minjun said, his voice carefully neutral. "I'll be outside." Adana's eyes met his for the first time since his confession. Something flickered in their depths, surprise perhaps, that he wasn't asserting dominance, wasn't trying to drive Daniel away with the sheer force of his presence. She said nothing, but her gaze held his for a long moment before she looked away. Minjun stepped into the hallway and leaned against the wall, closing his eyes.
She turned her face away, but not before he saw the tears escape. "I was so angry," she whispered. "When you sent me away, when you looked at me like I was a stranger, like 5 years meant nothing, I thought I would never stop being angry. I thought rage would keep me alive. And now I'm just tired." Her voice cracked. "I'm tired of being angry. I'm tired of being strong. I'm tired of pretending I don't still love you even after everything you did." Minjun's heart stopped. "You still don't." She raised a hand, still not looking at him. "Don't make this into something it isn't. Love doesn't mean forgiveness. It doesn't mean trust. It doesn't mean I can just forget that you threw me away, that you chose someone else, that you believed manufactured lies over the woman who shared your bed for 5 years. I know. Do you? Do you really understand what it felt like? To stand in that garden and beg you to believe me, and watch you walk away." Now she did turn to face him, and the pain in her eyes was devastating. "I gave you everything, Minjun. Everything I had. And you threw it away like garbage." "I know." He wanted to reach for her, to pull her into his arms, to hold her until the broken pieces somehow fit together again. But he stayed still, respecting the distance she needed. "I know what I did, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn back what I destroyed. Not because I expect you to forgive me, because you deserve to know that the man who hurt you has changed, that he understands what he did, that he will never, ever make that mistake again." Silence stretched between them, heavy with history and hurt and the terrible, fragile possibility of healing. Finally, Adana spoke. "My mother always said that God's timing is not our timing." Her voice was barely audible. She said that sometimes he breaks us so thoroughly that we have no choice but to rebuild from scratch, that the new thing he creates from the rubble is always stronger than what was there before. "Do you believe that?" "I don't know." She looked at him, really looked, for the first time since he'd confessed the truth. "But I know that I don't want to die angry. I don't want to go into that surgery tomorrow carrying hatred in my heart. Not for you. Not for Yuna. Not for anyone. You're not going to die. You don't know that."
"No."
He finally let himself take her hand, so gently she could pull away if she wanted. She didn't. "But I believe it. I believe you're going to fight through the surgery. I believe you're going to recover. I believe you're going to have decades ahead of you. And I believe I'm going to spend those decades proving that I've changed." "Minjun,
"Sleep."
He squeezed her hand softly. "Tomorrow is going to be hard.
"You need rest."
I'll be right here when you wake up." She didn't tell him she forgave him. She didn't tell him she trusted him. But her hand stayed in his as her eyes drifted closed, and when sleep finally claimed her, her fingers were still wrapped around his. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a beginning. While Adana slept, Minjun made calls. The first was to Director Seo. "I want Yuna Park arrested tomorrow morning. The moment the markets open, I want her removed from the building in handcuffs. I want every news outlet in Seoul covering it. I want the world to know what she did." "Sir, are you certain?" "The public spectacle could. She tried to destroy my wife's life. She manufactured evidence, manipulated witnesses, exploited my trust. She deserves to be exposed for exactly what she is." Minjun's voice was ice. "And I want the Park family assets frozen. Every account, every property, every investment connected to her scheme. By the time I'm finished, she won't have enough money to buy coffee." "Understood, sir." The second call was to his lawyers. "I want the separation papers voided. Officially. I want it on record that the dissolution of my marriage was based on fraudulent evidence and that I am formally rescinding my request." "Mr. Kong, that's highly unusual. The other party would need to." "I'll handle the other party. Just prepare the documentation. The third call was the hardest. He stared at his phone for a long moment, then dialed a number he hadn't called in years. It rang 4 times before a voice answered. A woman's voice, warm and curious, speaking Igbo before switching to English. "Hello, Mrs. Okafor? This is Minjun Kong, Adana's husband." Silence. Then, "I know who you are, Mr. Kong. Adana told me what you did." Chisholm Okafor, Adana's younger sister, the only family she had left. "She's in the hospital," Minjun said. "Surgery tomorrow. I thought you should know." The sound that came through the phone was half gasp, half sob.
What?
"What surgery? She didn't tell me she was sick. Cancer. Her kidney." The doctors are optimistic, but he stopped, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "She didn't tell you because she didn't want to burden you. Because she was facing everything alone. Because I abandoned her, and she had no one. I'm coming. The next flight, I'm coming. I'll send my plane. It will be faster. Give me your location, and my people will handle everything." "Your plane?" Chisholm. He used her first name deliberately, trying to bridge the gap his failures had created. "I know you hate me. You should hate me. But I love your sister, and I am going to spend the rest of my life making up for what I did. Right now, that means getting you here as fast as possible.
Please.
Let me help." Another long silence. Then, "She loved you so much. She called me every week and talked about you like you were the answer to every prayer she'd ever prayed. And then you destroyed her. I know. I don't forgive you. I don't expect you to. But I'm getting on your plane. Because Adana needs family. And because..." Her voice hardened. "Because I want to look you in the eye when this is over. I want to see for myself whether you're really the man my sister believed in, or whether you're the monster you've proven yourself to be." "Fair enough." He gave her the details for the plane, then ended the call. Outside the hospital window, dawn was beginning to break. In a few hours, Una Park would learn that her carefully constructed scheme had collapsed. In a few hours, Adana would go into surgery. In a few hours, everything would change. Una was having breakfast when they came for her. She sat in her pristine apartment, sipping green tea and reviewing her schedule for the day, when the door burst open and 6 men in dark suits flooded in. Director Seo was at the front, his weathered face grim with something that looked like satisfaction. "Director Park." His voice was formal, cold. "You are under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and the deliberate manipulation of evidence in a criminal matter. Please come with us." Una's teacup clattered against its saucer. "This is ridiculous. You have no authority. I have Mr. Kang's authority. And I have evidence." Jean Woo produced a tablet, showing her the documentation they had gathered. "Digital forensics on the photographs you manufactured. Financial records tracing payments to your witnesses. Encrypted communications outlining your 2-year plan to destroy Mrs. Kang's reputation and marriage." The color drained from Yuna's face. "I want my lawyer." "Of course. You'll have plenty of time for lawyers." Jean Woo nodded to his men. "Take her." As they led her toward the door, Yuna's composure finally cracked. "You think this changes anything?" she spat. He already threw her away. He already proved he didn't trust her. Even if you clear her name, he destroyed their marriage with his own hands. That doesn't go away. Jean Woo studied her with something like pity.
No.
It doesn't go away. But Mrs. Kong is a remarkable woman. And Mr. Kong is a man who learns from his mistakes. He paused at the door. "Which is more than I can say for you." By noon, the news had spread through Seoul's business community like wildfire. Director Una Park of Kong Corporation had been arrested for an elaborate scheme to frame the CEO's wife for corporate espionage. The evidence was damning. The scandal was enormous. Kong Corporation's stock dipped slightly on the news, then stabilized as investors recognized that Minjun was cleaning house. The message was clear. No one betrayed Minjun Kong and escaped justice. Not even the people he had trusted most. The surgery took 7 hours. Minjun sat in the waiting room with Daniel on one side and Chisholm, who had arrived just as they were wheeling Adana toward the operating theater, on the other. An unlikely trio, united by love for the same woman. Chisholm hadn't spoken more than a dozen words to him since her arrival. She sat rigid in her chair, clutching a worn Bible, her lips moving in silent prayer. She looked like Adana, the same graceful features, the same expressive eyes, but where Adana's warmth drew people in, Chisholm's current coldness pushed everyone away. She's protecting herself, Minjun realized, preparing for the worst, refusing to let me see her break. He understood that impulse better than anyone. She talked about you, he said finally, breaking the silence. All the time, your children, your husband, the life you built in Lagos. She was so proud of you. Chisholm's jaw tightened. She talked about you too. Before. She said you were the most complicated man she'd ever met. That loving you was like trying to hold water. The harder she gripped, the more you slipped away. She was right. Then why? Chisholm finally turned to face him, and he saw tears glistening in her eyes. Why did you marry her if you were never going to let her in? Why did you make her believe in a future you weren't willing to fight for? Because I was broken. The admission came easier now, after days of facing his failures. Because I thought I could control everything, including my own heart. Because I told myself that keeping her at a distance was protecting both of us, when really I was just too afraid to be vulnerable. And now I've learned that distance doesn't protect anyone. It just means you're alone when everything falls apart. He looked down at his hands, the hands that had signed her away, that had held her last night, that still bore faint marks from when he destroyed his office. I love her, Chisholm. I always have. I just didn't know how to show it without feeling like I was handing her a weapon. Daniel shifted in his seat on Minjun's other side. That's what I told her, he said quietly. Years ago. I told her you were too damaged, too controlled, too afraid. I told her she was wasting her time on a man who would never open up. You were right.
No.
I was incomplete. Daniel leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. I saw the walls. I didn't see that someone had built them for a reason. I didn't understand that some people have to be taught how to love, that it doesn't come naturally to everyone. She taught me. Minjun's voice cracked. For 5 years, she tried to teach me. And I was too stubborn, too scared, to learn. You're learning now. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement. And in this strange waiting room, surrounded by people who had every reason to hate him, Minjun felt something he hadn't felt in years.
Hope.
The surgeon appeared at 4:47 p.m. Dr. Kim still wore her surgical scrubs, and there was exhaustion in her face, but also something that made Minjun's heart stutter. Relief. The surgery was successful, she said, and Minjun heard Chisholm release a sob. We were able to remove the affected kidney completely. The margins are clean, no visible spread to surrounding tissue. We won't have final pathology results for a few days, but initial assessment is extremely positive. She's going to be okay? Daniel asked. She has a long recovery ahead of her. Surgery is just the first step. We'll need to monitor her closely, possibly pursue additional treatment, depending on the pathology.
But yes.
Her prognosis is excellent. Minjun closed his eyes. Thank you. He wasn't sure who he was thanking, God, the universe, fate itself. But the words rose up from somewhere deep, somewhere he had forgotten existed. Thank you for giving me another chance. Can we see her?
Chisholm asked.
She's in recovery now. Still sedated. But yes, you can see her briefly. She should be fully awake in a few hours. They followed Dr. Kim through the sterile corridors, and Minjun let himself feel, for the first time in weeks, something other than guilt and fear and despair. She's alive. She's going to live. And I'm going to spend every day of that life proving I deserve to be in it. The days that followed blurred together. Adana woke groggy and confused, her body struggling to process the trauma of surgery. Chisholm was at her bedside constantly, fussing and praying and filling the room with the particular warmth of family. Daniel came every day, bringing food and flowers and stories from their shared community. And Minjun stayed. He stayed even when Adana was irritable from pain medication. He stayed when she snapped at nurses and complained about hospital food. He stayed when she cried in the middle of the night, her body racked with the physical and emotional toll of everything she had endured. He brought her books, the Nigerian authors she loved, the Korean novels she'd been trying to read in their original language, the art books that had always inspired her work. He arranged for her business to be maintained in her absence, hiring a temporary manager who reported to her daily. He coordinated with her doctors, her insurance, her legal team. He handled everything she couldn't, and he asked for nothing in return. Slowly, so slowly, something began to shift. Adana started looking at him differently. Not with the cold distance of the early days, not with the raw pain of his confession, but with something more complicated. Something curious. Something cautiously hopeful. "You're different," she said one afternoon, 3 weeks after her surgery. She was sitting up in bed now, strong enough to eat solid food and take short walks down the hospital corridor. Softer. More present. "I'm trying to be." "Why?" She studied him with those dark, expressive eyes. "Is it because you feel guilty? Because you think I might die, and you want to make peace?"
No.
He moved his chair closer, something he did automatically now, closing the distance whenever she let him. "It's because I finally understand what I was doing wrong. I was treating love like a transaction, something I gave in careful doses, always holding back enough that I could survive if you left. But love doesn't work that way. It has to be all or nothing. You can't protect yourself and truly love someone at the same time." That's very philosophical for a man who used to communicate primarily in glares and monosyllables. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "I've had a lot of time to think." She was quiet for a moment. "Chisholm likes you now," she told me. "She has a strange way of showing it. That's our family. We love fiercely, and we express it through criticism." Adana's voice softened. "She said you sent a plane for her, that you've been paying for her hotel, her meals, everything. You didn't have to do that. She's your family. That makes her my family." "We're not." Adana stopped, the words catching in her throat. "Minjun, we're not actually married anymore. The papers. I voided them." She stared at him. "What?" "The separation papers. I had my lawyers void them the day of your surgery, on the grounds that the dissolution was based on fraudulent evidence." He met her gaze steadily. "Legally, we're still married. If you want to file for divorce, I won't contest it. But I wasn't going to let our marriage end because of Yuna's lies." "You can't just, you didn't even ask me." "I know. And I'm sorry. It was presumptuous." "But Adana," he leaned forward, his voice fierce with emotion. "I am done letting other people define our relationship. Yuna manipulated me into throwing you away once. I will not let her actions finalize the destruction of something I should have fought for from the beginning." Adana's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "So we're married." "We're married. And Yuna? In custody. She'll go to trial for fraud, conspiracy, and a dozen other charges. She's going to prison for a very long time."
Good.
There was no softness in Adana's voice when she said it. "She tried to destroy me. She manipulated you. Her voice broke. She made me think my husband didn't love me. She made me spend weeks thinking I was worthless, that 5 years meant nothing, that I could be discarded like trash. She will pay for every moment of that suffering. I promise you." Adana looked at him, at this man who had broken her and was now fighting so hard to put her back together. "I don't know if I can trust you again," she whispered. "I want to. Part of me wants to pretend none of this happened, to go back to how things were. But I can't forget, Minjun. I can't forget how easily you believed the worst of me. I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking you to let me earn it back. One day at a time. One moment at a time. However long it takes." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached out and took his hand. "Okay," she said softly. "One day at a time." Yuna's trial dominated the news for weeks. The evidence was overwhelming. The digital forensics, the financial records, the testimony of the witnesses she had paid to lie. Her defense team tried to paint her as a woman scorned, driven to desperate acts by unrequited love, but the judge wasn't sympathetic. Neither was the public. She was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 12 years in prison. Minjun watched the verdict from his office, feeling nothing. Justice had been served, but it couldn't undo the damage she had caused. It couldn't give him back the weeks he had wasted, the tears Adana had cried, the trust that had been shattered. He turned off the news and went back to the hospital. But Yuna's conviction didn't end the threats to their world. A week after the verdict, Director Seo requested an urgent meeting. "There's a problem," he said, his weathered face grave. "The Park family isn't taking Yuna's conviction well. Specifically, her father, Park Sung-ho's father, has been making inquiries." "What kind of inquiries?" "The kind that suggest he's looking for leverage. Against you, against Kong Corporation, against Mrs. Kong." Jin-woo set a file on Minjun's desk. "There are rumors that he's gathering information, financial records, personal history, anything that could be used as ammunition." Minjun's expression hardened. "He thinks he can threaten us because his daughter is in prison?" "I think he blames Mrs. Kong for Yuna's downfall. And I think he's dangerous enough to act on that blame. Then we neutralize him." "Sir, I will not allow another threat to touch my wife." Minjun's voice was ice and steel. "Investigate Park Sr. Find his vulnerabilities. Find what he's hiding. And prepare to destroy him if he comes anywhere near Adana." Jin-woo nodded slowly. "There's something else. The investigation into his activities has revealed some troubling connections. It appears the Park family has ties to certain organizations in Lagos, organizations that operate outside the law." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that when Yuna targeted Mrs. Kong, she may have opened a door to something larger. Something that involves both of your worlds, Korean and Nigerian. Something dangerous." Minjun stared at the file on his desk, his mind racing. Adana's heritage, his mother's connections, the empire his father had built on foundations that were never quite legitimate. Blood remembers, the tattoo on his wrist said. Perhaps blood also created debts that couldn't be escaped. "Find out everything," he ordered. "And double security on Adana. I don't want her going anywhere without protection." "Yes, sir." After Jin-woo left, Minjun sat alone in his office, staring out at the Seoul skyline. He had thought the danger was over. He had thought Yuna's arrest was the end. But the web she had woven had threads extending far beyond what anyone had realized. And somewhere in that web, something dark was waiting. Adana came home on a Thursday. Not to the penthouse, not yet. The memories there were too fresh, the shadows too long. Instead, Minjun had purchased a smaller property, a traditional hanok that had been renovated with modern amenities while preserving its historical character. It sat in a quiet neighborhood, surrounded by gardens, with a security system that rivaled the Blue House. She walked through the room slowly, taking in the space he had created for her. The walls held art from Nigerian artists she loved. The kitchen was stocked with ingredients for the meals she had grown up eating. The garden contained flowers from both her homeland and his, a deliberate echo of the garden she had created in the penthouse, the one that was now wilting without her care. "You did all this?" Her voice was soft with wonder. "I wanted you to have a place that felt like home. A place with no painful memories. A place where we could start over, if you want to." Adana turned to face him. She was still too thin, still recovering, but color had returned to her cheeks, and the light was coming back into her eyes. The months of hell were slowly receding, replaced by something that looked almost like peace. "I want to," she said quietly. "I think. But there are things you need to understand first." "Tell me." She sat on one of the low couches, and he sat across from her, close but not touching, respecting the boundaries she still needed. "When I was diagnosed," she began, "I was so angry at you, at life, at God. I actually thought for a moment that maybe I deserved it. Maybe the cancer was punishment for something I had done wrong." "You didn't." "Let me finish." She held up a hand. "I know it's irrational. I know that's not how illness works. But when you lose everything in a matter of days, your marriage, your home, your health, your mind looks for explanations. Even terrible ones." He stayed silent, letting her speak. "Daniel was there. Chisholm flew in. The Nigerian community rallied around me. And slowly, I started to realize that I wasn't alone. That I had never been alone. That even when you abandoned me, I had people who loved me. You did. You do. But it made me think about something. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. For 5 years, I made you the center of my world. I structured everything around your needs, your schedule, your emotional walls. I tried so hard to earn your trust that I forgot to maintain my own life, my own friends, my own community, my own identity outside of being your wife. Minjun's chest tightened. That was my fault. I should have encouraged.
No.
It was my choice. I could have maintained those connections. I could have insisted on my own space. But I was so in love with you, so determined to be what you needed, that I lost myself. She paused. I don't want to do that again. I don't want you to either. I mean it, Minjun. If we're going to rebuild this, if we're going to have a real marriage, I need to be my own person. Not an extension of you. Not a wife who exists only in your shadow. A partner. An equal. Yes. You say that now. But when I start traveling again, pursuing my own projects, spending time with friends you don't know, will you really be okay with that? Will you trust me? It was the question at the heart of everything. Minjun looked at this woman, this magnificent woman who had survived his betrayal and her illness and the destruction of everything she had built. She deserved better than the man he had been. The question was whether he could become the man she deserved. I trust you, he said, and the words felt like stepping off a cliff. I trust you completely. And I will prove it. Not with promises, but with actions. You want to travel? I'll arrange security, but I won't track your movements. You want to pursue projects? I'll support them without trying to control them. You want to have friends, relationships, a life that exists independent of me?
Good.
Because I never want you to feel trapped again. Adana studied him for a long moment. Then she rose, crossed the space between them, and sat beside him on the couch. Show me, she said quietly. Show me who you've become. And he did. The charity gala was Adana's first public appearance since her illness. Minjun had wanted to delay, to give her more time to recover, to shield her from the whispers and stares that would inevitably follow their reunion. But Adana insisted. I've been hiding long enough, she said. I want the world to see that I survived. That we survived. So they went. The event was at the same venue where they had first met 7 years ago. A deliberate choice. A symbolic return to the beginning. Adana wore a gown that blended Korean and Nigerian influences, silk the color of garnets, with traditional Korean embroidery patterns rendered in gold thread that echoed Igbo geometric designs. Her natural hair was styled in elaborate twists adorned with delicate gold jewelry. She looked like a queen. Minjun stood beside her in a black suit, the tattoo on his neck deliberately visible, his hand resting on the small of her back. The gesture was protective, possessive, but tonight it was also something else. It was a declaration. She is mine. I am hers. And the world needs to know it. The whispers started the moment they entered. That's Minjun Kang's wife, the one who was accused of corporate espionage. She was innocent, didn't you hear? The whole thing was fabricated. I heard she had cancer. Look at them together. Do you think they've really reconciled? Minjun felt Adana tense beside him. Without a word, he guided her toward the center of the room, toward the small stage where donors would soon make their speeches. What are you doing? She whispered. Making a statement. Before she could protest, he stepped onto the stage and signaled for the microphone. The room fell silent. 300 of Seoul's most powerful and influential citizens stared up at him, businessmen and politicians and socialites who had spent months speculating about his failed marriage, his wife's alleged betrayal, the scandal that had consumed the Kong Empire. He was about to give them something else to talk about. Good evening. His voice carried easily, that commanding stillness that made people lean in to listen. I know many of you have heard rumors about my personal life over the past few months. Tonight, I want to set the record straight. Beside the stage, Adana watched him with wide eyes. My wife, Adana Okoye-kong, was accused of terrible things. Corporate espionage, betrayal, infidelity. Every accusation was false. Every piece of evidence was manufactured by someone who wanted to destroy our marriage for her own purposes. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I believed those lies. Minjun's voice didn't waver, but there was raw honesty in it that made people uncomfortable. I looked at fabricated photographs and forged documents, and I chose to believe them over the woman who had loved me faithfully for 5 years. I sent my wife away. I destroyed our marriage with my own cowardice and suspicion. The silence was absolute now. Adana faced the aftermath of that betrayal alone. She was diagnosed with cancer. She underwent surgery. She fought for her life while I sat in an empty penthouse, too proud to admit I had made a mistake. He turned to look at her directly. But I am not too proud now. He extended his hand toward her.
Adana.
Will you come up here? She hesitated for only a moment. Then she took his hand and let him guide her onto the stage, standing beside him before 300 witnesses. This woman, Minjun said, his voice fierce with emotion, is the strongest, most graceful, most magnificent person I have ever known. She forgave me when I didn't deserve forgiveness. She trusted me when I had given her every reason not to. She chose to rebuild something I had broken beyond recognition. He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. Adana Okoye-kong, I love you. I have always loved you. And I am publicly, formally, permanently committing myself to spending the rest of my life proving worthy of your love. I will never doubt you again. I will never choose fear over trust again. You are my partner, my equal, my heart, and if you'll let me, I want to marry you again.
Properly.
With our families present, with the world as witness. Tears were streaming down Adana's face. The room held its breath. And then she smiled, that radiant, heart-stopping smile that had captured him 7 years ago across a crowded room.
Yes, she said.
Yes. They married on a Saturday in spring. The ceremony was held at a venue that bridged both their worlds, a historic estate outside Seoul with grounds that had been transformed into something magical. Korean paper lanterns hung alongside Nigerian woven textiles. The officiant was a priest who spoke 3 languages and wove together traditions from both cultures into something new and wholly theirs. Chisholm was the matron of honor. Her earlier coldness melted into tearful joy. Daniel stood among the groomsmen, an unexpected choice that raised eyebrows, but Minjun had insisted. He was there for her when I wasn't, he said simply. That makes him family. Adana walked down the aisle in a gown that had taken 3 Nigerian seamstresses and 2 Korean designers to create. White silk with traditional Korean sleeve patterns, overlaid with Igbo ceremonial motifs hand-embroidered in silver and gold. A crown of orange blossoms and African violets sat atop her natural hair. Minjun watched her approach and felt the last of his walls crumble into dust. He had spent his life building fortresses, creating distance, protecting himself from the vulnerability that love required. And it had brought him nothing but misery. But this woman walking toward him with love shining in her eyes despite everything he had done, this was worth every risk, every fear, every moment of uncertainty. This was worth everything. When she reached him, he took her hands and held them like prayers. I, Minjun Kong, take you Adana Okoye to be my wife. Again, forever. I promise to trust you without reservation, to choose you over fear, to stand beside you through illness and health, through doubt and certainty, through every storm that life sends our way. I promise to learn how to love better, to listen more than I speak, to hold you without trying to control you, to be the partner you deserve. Adana's voice was steady when she spoke her vows. I, Adana Okoye, take you Minjun Kong to be my husband. Again, forever. I promise to give you room to grow, to forgive the past while building the future, to be strong without losing my softness, to love you as you are while believing in who you can become. I promise to never let fear or distance come between us again. The rings were exchanged, the vows were sealed, and when Minjun kissed his wife, finally and truly his, the crowd erupted in cheers that echoed across the estate and into the spring sky. The first 6 months of their renewed marriage were the happiest of Minjun's life. They learned each other again, not as the people they had been, but as the people they were becoming. Minjun practiced vulnerability, sharing his fears and doubts instead of burying them behind walls of silence. Adana practiced independence, pursuing her art and her business and her friendships without guilt or apology. They fought sometimes. They disagreed. They had hard conversations about the wounds that were still healing. But they never stopped talking, never stopped trying, never stopped choosing each other. Then Director Seo delivered the news that shattered their peace. Park Sr. has made his move, Jin-woo said, his face grim. He's partnered with a criminal organization based in Lagos, one with ties to the Nigerian underworld. They're planning to target your wife. Minjun's blood went cold. Target her how? Abduction. They want to use her as leverage, to force you to drop the charges against Yuna and restore the Park family's position in society. That's insane. Yuna's already been convicted. The charges are done. They want the conviction overturned. They want public rehabilitation. And they think threatening Mrs. Kong is the way to achieve it. Minjun stood slowly, his expression hardening into something dangerous. When? Our intelligence suggests they're planning to move within the week. We've identified their operatives. Several are already in Seoul. And you're just telling me now? The intelligence only became reliable this morning. Jin-woo met his gaze steadily. I came to you immediately. Minjun's mind was racing. Security protocols. Safe houses. Counter-operations. The dark machinery of his father's world, the world he had inherited and tried to distance himself from, was ready to be activated. But first he had to tell Adana. She took the news better than he expected. So someone wants to kidnap me to force your hand, she said, her voice remarkably calm. Again, I'm a pawn in someone else's game. You're not a pawn. You're my wife. And I will burn the world down before I let anyone touch you. Minjun. I mean it. He gripped her hands, his eyes fierce. I failed to protect you once. I let Yuna destroy our marriage, while I did nothing. That will never happen again. These people will learn what it means to threaten Minjun Kang's family. Adana studied his face, the hard set of his jaw, the darkness in his eyes, the coiled violence barely contained beneath his elegant exterior. You're different when you talk like this, she said quietly. More like your father. My father would have sacrificed anyone to protect his empire. I'm protecting you. There's a difference. Is there? The question hung between them.
Minjun forced himself to take a breath.
To step back from the edge of the darkness that was always waiting inside him. What do you want me to do? He asked finally. Tell me. I'll do whatever you think is right. It was, perhaps, the most important question he had ever asked her. Adana was quiet for a long moment. I want you to protect me, she said. But I also want to be part of the solution. I'm not going to hide in a safe house while you fight this battle alone. We're partners now. That means we face this together. Minjun's first instinct was to refuse. To insist on her safety above all else. To lock her away, where nothing could reach her. But that was the old Minjun. The man who thought control was the same as protection. The man who had lost everything because he couldn't trust anyone but himself. Together, he agreed. But we do this smart. We plan. We use every resource available. And if it comes to a fight, you stay behind me. Always. Adana smiled, that fierce, beautiful smile that had captured him from the very first moment.
Deal.
The attack came 3 nights later. They were ready for it. Minjun's security team had identified the operatives and tracked their movements. They knew the plan, an ambush during Adana's evening visit to her art studio, where she would be more vulnerable than at their fortified home. What the attackers didn't know was that Adana's studio had been transformed into a trap. When the 6 men breached the building, they found not a defenseless woman but a coordinated strike force. Minjun's people moved with military precision, neutralizing threats before they could react. Minjun himself was at the center of the operation, not hiding behind his security team, but fighting beside them. The tattoo on his neck seemed to pulse in the dim light as he moved, every action controlled and lethal. Within minutes, it was over. The attackers were subdued, their weapons confiscated, their plans in ruins. Minjun stood over the leader, a man whose face he recognized from Jin-woo's files, one of Park Sr.'s closest associates. Tell your employer that Adana Okoye-kong is under my protection, Minjun said, his voice ice. Tell him that if he sends anyone else, I will respond with everything at my disposal. And tell him that the next time, I won't be satisfied with arrests. The message was delivered. Park Sr., facing the collapse of his criminal enterprise and the exposure of his connections, chose to flee Korea rather than face the consequences. Within weeks, his assets were seized, his reputation destroyed, and his family scattered to the winds. The threat was eliminated, and Minjun returned to his wife with blood on his knuckles and peace in his heart. 1 year after her surgery, Adana stood in the garden of their Hanok home, surrounded by the flowers they had planted together. The cancer was in remission, confirmed by every test, every scan, every hopeful prognosis. Her body had healed. Her spirit had healed. And somehow, against all odds, her marriage had healed too. Minjun found her there as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The test results came back, she said, not turning around. His heart stuttered. And, still clear. Another year cancer-free. He released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. That's wonderful. It is. She turned to face him, and he saw that she was crying. But these were not tears of sorrow. I never thought I would have this. After everything that happened, the diagnosis, the divorce, the betrayal, I thought my life was over. I thought I would die alone and bitter and broken. You didn't.
No.
I didn't. She crossed the garden to him, taking his face in her hands. Because you came back. Because you fought for me. Because you finally let yourself love me the way I always knew you could. Minjun pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. I was so afraid, he admitted. For so long. Afraid that love would destroy me the way it destroyed my parents. Afraid that trust would be used against me. Afraid that if I let anyone in, they would see the darkness inside me and run. I see you, Adana whispered. All of you. The darkness and the light. And I'm still here. I know. And I will spend every day of my life making sure you never regret that choice. They stood together in the fading light, surrounded by the garden they had built, a garden that bridged 2 worlds, 2 cultures, 2 hearts that had found their way back to each other through pain and betrayal and the stubborn, impossible resilience of love. The tattoo on Minjun's wrist caught the last rays of sunlight. Blood remembers. But so, he had learned, does love. The little girl had her mother's eyes and her father's silence. At 4 years old, Adi's calm was already a study in contrasts, warm like Adana, watchful like Minjun, fierce like both of them combined. She toddled through the garden of their home, chattering in a mixture of Korean, English, and the Igbo that Chisholm was teaching her during summer visits. Minjun watched her from the terrace, Adana tucked against his side. She's going to break hearts someday, Adana murmured. She's going to rule, Minjun corrected. Look at her. She already knows exactly what she wants. As if to prove his point, Adiz marched up to a flower she wanted to pick, examined it critically, and decided to leave it where it was, a small act of mercy that made both her parents smile. You know, Adana said, I used to imagine what our children would be like, back when we first got married, before everything fell apart. And, does reality match the imagination? It's better. She looked up at him, her eyes soft with love. Everything is better. Because we earned this, Minjun. We fought for it. We almost lost it, and we fought to get it back. He kissed her forehead, then her cheek, then her lips. I love you, he said. Words that came easily now, words he spoke every day because he had learned what it meant to almost lose the chance to say them. I love you too. Adiz, apparently offended by her parents' lack of attention, came storming back to the terrace with a demand for snacks that would not be ignored. Minjun scooped her up, settling her on his hip with the ease of practiced fatherhood. Appa, she commanded, using the Korean word for father. Cookie. What do we say? Please, Cookie. Better. He carried her inside, Adana following with a smile on her face and peace in her heart. They had survived betrayal. They had survived illness. They had survived the darkness that lived inside Minjun and the pain that had almost broken Adana. And now, finally, they were home.